Weatherlight, a set that was a part of Mirage block, but separate. A small set to round out the first true 3-set block about the continent of Jamura ended up instead setting up a storyline that would run through the year 2001. Clearly designed in a vacuum apart from its previous 2 sets, Weatherlight proved its worth by the strength of its cards, with many of its designs so strong and unique that they continue to see tournament tables to this day. So hop aboard the Weatherlight as we set sail and see how a small set can make a big impact. Weatherlight was released on June 6, 1997. It was released on Magic Online on December 12, 2007, over 10 years later. It featured Steel Golem on its booster packaging with the Thran Tome as its set symbol. It included 167 new cards, 50 rares, 55 uncommons, and 62 commons. Despite Mirage and Visions focusing on Jamura, an African-like continent where warring tribes were the focus, the team took the 3rd set in a completely different direction. Weatherlight was to kick off the Weatherlight saga, and so many of the cards featured characters from the story or important plot points. It was designed to be focused on the graveyard, with 35 cards, over 1/5 of the set, referencing the graveyard. It was the first set to ever truly use the graveyard as a resource. Some return cards to the battlefield or your hand, like Angelic Renewal, Argivian Restoration, Mistmoon Griffin, and Strands of Night. Others focused on something that is no longer a part of the game at all, the order of cards in a graveyard. Cards like Bone Dancer, Bosium Strip, Spinning Darkness, and Zombie Scavengers all care about a type of card and whether it is the topmost of it in a graveyard. Today, the comprehensive rules clearly state, the order of graveyards can be whatever players want them to be, unless playing with sets prior to Urza's Saga. Weatherlight's impact on competitive Magic was clearly seen in the 1997 World Championship decks. These were produced as an individual product from 1997 to 2004 and featured gold-bordered cards not legal in tournament play. They also had the player's signature on every single card. The winning deck featured a Weatherlight rare that continues to see play in Legacy and Modern formats. Gemstone Mine is a powerful mana fixer, providing 3 mine counters that you can deplete for any color of mana. Color fixing that doesn't hurt you in some way, like City of Brass, or only gives you a one-time usage, such as the Oath of the Gatewatch land Crumbling Vestige. Thankfully, it is not on the reserve list, and as such has been reprinted in Time Spiral as a time-shifted rare and as a promotional foil for the Judge program. Abeyance was a popular constructed worthy card that saw play well into the mid-2000s as a way to clear a path for your spell to resolve against a counterspell-wielding opponent or to prevent your opponents from playing tricks during combat. But for a short while, it was even more powerful. Released almost 2 years later, 6th edition brought with it the 6th edition rules changes. These rule updates were the largest ever for Magic, and it brought some very important updates like the removal of interrupts and the addition of the stack. Other somewhat silly rules were also removed, like tapped blockers dealing no combat damage. But what also changed was there were no more mana sources, and instead everything worked equally, and tapping lands or creatures for mana was a mana source ability, and it would not be affected by a card like Abeyance. That was until 6th edition. After this spell turned from good to an instant speed time-walking cantrip, it was immediately eroded to work as intended, and no longer prevents mana abilities from being activated. 2 lands in the set, Lotus Veil and Scorched Ruins, were actually eroded, as before 6th edition rules, all comes into play costs had to be paid before a card was considered in play. Both were changed to require the sacrifice before their abilities could be used. Also showing up at the World Championships was a mono-green aggro deck featuring a playset of Rogue Elephant and 3 Harvest Worms. As powerful creatures were hard to find back in the early days of Magic, these stood out as excellent options amongst a very limited selection. They also highlighted the second unnamed mechanic in the set, Sacrifice Buyouts. It was seen exclusively on green and black cards. The other creatures with the Sacrifice clause included Barrowghoul, Circling Vultures, and Hidden Horror. None of them were ever strong enough to see tournament tables. While Control Magic had not been seen since 4th edition, a new option appeared with Abduction. Nowhere near as powerful as the original enchantment, stealing a creature even temporarily was often good enough. One of the longest-lasting tournament staples from Weatherlight includes Disrupt. This powerful and cheap Force Spike variant is also a cantrip, replacing itself while potentially countering a spell to boot. It was reprinted 3 years later in Invasion and saw high-level play at the 2004 Extended Pro Tour in Columbus. Excellent in the era's Psychotog decks, it continues to see tournament use from published deck lists as recent as 2015. Mind Stone gave Magic a casual and cube draft favorite, as a new mana rock that could also sacrifice itself to cantrip. Later, Rise of the Eldrazi's Dreamstone Hedron would also be known as a triple Mind Stone, and we finally saw the double Mind Stone in the form of Hedron Archive as printed in 2015's Battle for Zendikar. Phyrexian Furnace was one of the first efficient ways to remove cards from graveyards, and saw play through the early 2000s. It was replaced by Mirrodin's Scrabbling Claws, and later by the even more powerful Shards of Alara common, Relic of Progenitus. But no card in Weatherlight had the impact that Ophidian did. This little snake created its own archetype called Forbidian, whose namesake came from Ophidian and the addition of the buyback counterspell Forbid. A mono-blue powerhouse was born as the pieces fell in place. Mana War, or Tradewind Rider, would remove opposing blockers, or Legacy's Allure would simply steal them. Sapphire Medallion provided mana acceleration, while Whispers of the Muse and Capsize gave you something to do with it. It debuted at US Nationals in 1998 and was a well-known archetype for years afterwards. Buried Alive debuted in Weatherlight and was later reprinted in Odyssey. The popular sorcery was often the go-to way to put creatures into the graveyard for Reanimator decks. Doomsday is a card that continues to perplex and win games of Magic to this day. One of the most unique effects in the entire game, the decks that feature it are often some of the, if not the, most difficult to pilot. Originally, players used a combination of Mind's Desire and Beacon of Destruction to create a loop where the beacon would continuously be played by Mind's Desire and shuffled into an empty library. It was also used in combination with Tendrils of Agony to perfectly stack your last few spells. And with the printing of Laboratory Maniac, things got even easier. Now a combination of Laboratory Maniac, Brainstorm, Mental Note, Unearth, and any other card could provide you an instant win. Serenity is a powerful mass disenchant that continues to see play to this day, even if you have to wait until your next turn to use it. It remains one of the cheapest ways to destroy all artifacts and enchantments while also not targeting any of them. Veteran Explorer saw play in the Nick Fit Legacy deck, and its effect is symmetrical, but few players use basics in their Legacy decks. Phyrexian Tower would produce mana both by sacrificing the Veteran Explorer plus the mana from the forests it would search up. While it pops up rarely these days, for a time it was a very exciting combo. Null Rod is a staple in Vintage and Legacy decks, as the 2-mana artifact hosts a host of powerful strategies. Sure, it doesn't do anything, but it sure does nothing very well. It is also never to be reprinted, as it is on the reserve list, just like our next card, Firestorm. An easy way to get rid of every card in your hand, this powerful direct damage spell is often seen in Legacy Dredge decks as a way to kill lots of little creatures, like elves, in one fell swoop. Previously, it was seen in Psychotog decks as a way to clear the path and fueling the Tog to victory. Weatherlight is a set that broke new ground and continued to push the boundaries of Magic. While it had little to do with the sets and the block it resides in, it provided the jumping-off point for one of the most important storylines ever to grace the game. The set also taught R&D the lesson that name mechanics are important and that players expect them. Without them, few players to this day understand the set was supposed to be a graveyard-centric one to begin with. But the impact of the set remains, and Magic wouldn't be the same without it. Thanks for watching. Did you enjoy this episode? Help me make more over at Patreon. Patrons get to see the show before anyone else, get their name in the credits, and ultimately this show does not exist without it. So head on over to Patreon and I'll see you guys there.